So, chapter 7. Let's see where they are. They were sat quietly in the study when Joss told him about her day. He growled at the story of the priest, vowing to go and have a word at the weekend, and they became fascinated in the details of the tunnels, statue, and young Harry. He agreed it had been a wise move not to explore further without taking precautions, and asked if she could find the statue again. Joss shrugged and thought she could. Her surprise at him jumping to his feet made him laugh. "Come on, baby girl, we have an hour of daylight left. Let's go and see it." Joss grumbled and followed him out of the study and through the house. She had been hoping for some special time with him, as she had been decidedly horny after her shower, and traipsing through the tunnels and grounds was not her idea of fun. She had dressed in a long, soft t-shirt and her favourite over-the-knee socks, and she knew he had looked at her with a growl building, but now she was going to go outside in the woods, where she would probably get eaten alive by bugs. Muttering about being sorry she had told him about the statue, she huffed into the seat next to him in the golf cart and hung on as he powered them down the path. He slid to a halt next to the pond, jumping out with a "Where now?" thrown over his shoulder. Joss pouted and flounced across to point out the faint path. "It's about 50 yards that way, sir. Do I have to come with you? There are creatures that bite in the grass and things, and I can't sit here and wait for you." DL laughed and patted her on the ass, a grin on his face. "The only creature around here likely to take a bite out of you is me, baby girl. But you can wait here. I won't be long." Joss mumbled about the chance would be a fine thing as she watched him disappear towards where she thought the statue was, then sat in the cart with a fixed scowl. DL walked quickly along the path, excited to see this latest discovery. If it was as Joss had described, he would have lifted it and brought it to the house. After cleaning, it would make an interesting feature in his planned new playroom. He was lost in thought about how to convert one of the tunnels, so much so that he nearly walked straight past the statue, only the obvious cleared brush catching his attention. Moving closer, he could see it was more intricate than Joss had described. It must have taken weeks to carve. The agony and ecstasy captured on the girl's face was just perfect. Though obviously carved when the house was built, he marvelled at the detail in the two rather large dildos that were protruding from the base and into the hapless girl. Even the screws in the shackles were delicately traced. This was a special piece. Immediately deciding it must come back to the house, he turned his attention to the open grille that led to the tunnel. The light was fading fast, but he couldn't resist taking a few steps down to get a feel of the place. He could sense how deep it was, and if he was correct, it would run all the way back to the house, a distance of what must be half a mile. Backing up slowly on the slippery floor, he thought he knew just the person to help explore this place, and they had all the gear. So with a smile, he set off along the track to return to the unhappy Joss. She was sat there mumbling, swatting at imaginary flies, cursing under her breath about the selfish antics of doms who think you have nothing better to do than sit in a wood in the middle of the night. When she suddenly jumped at a sudden breeze blowing around her knees. Lifting her head and looking around her, she was disconcerted to notice it was now quite dark. Where the hell was he? She stood up in the cart and looked in the direction he had gone. Sir? It is getting dark, sir. I think we should be going now. She had raised her voice so that he must have heard her. Why didn't he answer? Getting angry now, she stomped along the path a short way and called again. Sir, I'm getting anemic from all the bug bites. Can we go back to the house now? She was just about to start cursing again when arms wrapped around her from behind and she was lifted from her feet. Joss just had time to squeak before one of the arms moved up and wrapped around her throat, cutting the air off as effectively as flipping a switch. She kicked and struggled, her legs flailing in the air, as she was carried towards a large tree and pressed hard against the unyielding trunk. Whoever had her used their body weight to keep her pinned as they kept her suspended in the air, her struggles and gasps getting slightly weaker as her head started to spin. Ooh. She barely registered when she felt herself taken, her assistant bouncing her on him like a doll. The arm moved from her throat, she gasped in the cool air, her body shaking from the powerful thrusts as she was penetrated deeply. The rough bark was scraping her breasts through the flimsy t-shirt, causing her to whimper between the thrusts, the harder ones making her grunt in her chest as she was pushed against the tree. She struggled again, aware her body was betraying her, and she knew she was dripping and making it easier for them to hurt her. Joss cried out when she was thrown to the floor, her breath taken again as her back impacted on the hard ground. But it was her attacker who scared her the most, now she could see him. She knew he could get big and hard when he was engorged, huge, and she mewled in fear as he lowered himself over her, dragging her shirt up to grasp her small breasts. She felt herself stretched as he pushed into her again, his face close, eyes on hers, as he deliberately started to hurt her again. She was pinned under him, her body hurting from being fucked so brutally. Yet Joss kept her eyes on his and panted out her plea. Use me, sir. Oh God, yes, use me. It hurts. Please, please. DL dropped his head and sank his teeth into her throat, Joss screaming as he lifted her hips and drove harder into her. Her legs waving in the air above her face as she writhed and tried to make herself easier to take, wanting him to finally break her. They were grunting in time to his thrusts, and as she felt the skin break on her throat, Joss came hard, feeling herself virtually squirt onto him as she arched her neck back and begged him to drink from her. The iron taste of blood tipped him over the edge, and the moans from the girl under him caused his balls to contract into emptiness, his growl joining her groan at that final moment. At last they were spent, he rolled onto his back and pulled the sobbing Jess onto his chest, soothing her with quiet words as she tried to thank him between the spasms in her body. Joss touched the bandage around her neck and smiled as she watched him organise the moving of the statue. It was the first time he had really hurt her, and though he had fussed over her when they got back to the house, she had seen the darkness in his eyes. She chuckled and pressed her pelvis against the countertop, the bruising making her wince, but not preventing a throb in her pussy. Damn, she was becoming a rape whore. She needed him to hurt her. She gave a little tremble, and even now she was getting wet at the memories. He must have felt her eyes on him as he turned from the statue and waved. Joss wrinkled her face and stuck her tongue out at him, then mouthed, "Bad man," making him laugh out loud. He resumed issuing orders to the bemused workmen as they laboured to get the large piece of erotic art off the back of the small truck. Joss thought it was ugly, almost too intimate, and she grinned at the exchanged glances between the men when they tried to figure out where to hold the damn thing. The news that DL had planned a new playroom in the cellars had come as a surprise, so she was determined she would get them explored before any work started. It would help if she had some kind of diagram, a map even, of exactly what was under there. But did one exist? Walking through to the study, she logged onto a computer and started a search, entering the name of the house, the district, anything that could link to the area. She speed-read the listings as they appeared, nothing really grabbing her attention, until on the third page there was a title: Lower Thorpe Church and Medieval Library. She scanned the article, her excitement building as it stated, holds many rare and ancient books and records from the past going back hundreds of years. If there was a map of this place, it had to be there. She clicked off the computer and her smile faded immediately. She remembered her last visit to the church. That dirty old bastard would be there, she growled in her throat. So nothing for it but to work her charms on DL and get him to come with her. She smirked and ran upstairs to change. Time for an entrance. DL had just managed to get the statue into the larger of the two outhouses when he realized that both the men helping him were looking the other way. Whatever they were looking at was hidden by the bulk of the statue, so leaning around the side of the stonework, he craned his neck in time to see Joss wandering across the patch of grass between them, his eyebrows going up at what she was wearing. Her long red hair was wild around her head, the tight cropped t-shirt moulded to her small breasts, and the short skirt and over-the-knee socks gave her that unmistakable, innocent schoolgirl gone bad aura. She walked slowly, pretending not to notice the open-mouthed stares from the workmen, instead fixing him with a shy smile as she sidled up and leaned into his chest. She tilted her head back, her big green eyes shining with mischief. I was wondering if the big bad man would like to take his little girl to church. I have a need to confess my sins. After all, she pouted for effect, I have done some very naughty things recently. DL coughed, well aware the men standing there, wide-eyed, could hear every word. And for the first time in umpteen years, he felt a blush spread up his cheeks. When Joss leaned closer and pressed against his groin, he was totally speechless. She batted her eyelids at him. Please, sir, I will be ever so grateful. He grabbed her arm with a gruff, I'll be back in a minute. He left the outhouse and frog-marched a giggling Joss back to the house. She skipped away from him once through the door and sat on the edge of the kitchen table, swinging her legs innocently, as though without a care in the world, only the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth betraying her real feelings. DL stood there looking at her, not being able to decide if he should beat her or hug her. He ran his hand over his scalp in frustration. You are the most infuriating, downright disobedient, cheeky and provocative fucking subby it has ever been my misfortune to meet. He paced the room, waving his arms while Jess put on her best sad face. I should beat you to within an inch of your life for that performance, he growled, and stood in front of her. Give me a reason why I shouldn't. Joss leaned back and stretched over the table, her knees lifting and falling apart, revealing her soft, swollen pussy. Nothing more needed to be said. That is the end of the chapter, Patty.